Hey everybody, this is Matt Finch, and this is Uncle Matt's D&D Neighborhood. And my guest today is Jacob Hurst. Say hello, Jacob.
Hey, everybody.
And Jacob is a few things to talk about. Before I do get started, though, let me just remind everybody to please subscribe to the channel and hit like on the video and all of that good stuff. There's a Patreon at patreon.com/Uncle Matt if you want to support the channel. And I'm going to give you an example of what it's like on the channel because we're going to talk to somebody very interesting about a very interesting product. Jacob, you just got nominated for an Emmy Award.
I know. Yeah, it's amazing. It's awesome.
It's
Super excited.
when I got nominated for mine, which was, ages and ages and ages ago, but it's a really odd sensation of being like, wait, what?
Right.
So tell us a little bit to start out with about the book.
Okay, sure. So, well, it's actually two books, and just one of the books got nominated. The one that was nominated is The Dark of Hot Springs Island. So it's the Dungeon Master's book or the Game Master's book that you use in order to run this sandbox campaign. It's a tropical island setting. There's 25 hexes. Every hex has 3 locations inside of it that you can find and explore and go through. There's like 6 different factions that are on the island, and they're all pretty much at a stalemate, when the party gets there. And then when adventurers show up and do what adventurers do and start killing things and stealing things, they're going to quickly upset the status quo, and then that's where the adventure is going to come from.
Or
So there's no
the adventurers could go in and cause harmony everywhere and just get everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can talk to everybody, you can be friends with everybody. It's very sort of like gray morality. I mean, there's a clear bad guy, but he tries to be likable. He wants to have friends. He wants people to do things for him, as opposed to just being like, "Oh, I'm an evil, lich in a cave, come kill me," right? And then the factions that are sort of obviously the good guys, they have things that they're doing that are not necessarily that great, right? So there are things that you can uncover, and then it's like, wait a minute, you were supposed to be, the noble savages that we were, going to be friends with because y'all are the good guys, but you're doing this terrible stuff over here. How do we reconcile that? So plenty of problems and no solutions because that's what the players are supposed to come up with. So
yeah, which is and let me go a little bit deeper into that because the question of what are the players going to do? This is a book that I've read, and I was very impressed. First of all, anybody watching, this is a real ass sandbox. This is not. There's no direction that is forced in any kind of storyline going on here at all. And so one of the things I wanted to talk about with Jacob about that is the technical difficulty involved in writing a real sandbox adventure in such a way that it can actually be used at the table, because it's not so hard if you made up your own sandbox, but if you bought one, the author has to be able to communicate to you in all kinds of different ways, not only what's going on there, but how to do it quickly. And so you obviously gave a lot of thought to that because it's quite impressive. So,
well, thank you. So I think one of the things that was sort of a major inspiration for me was I loved Planescape. When I was younger, I had a cousin who gave me like the Planes of Chaos box set as a gift for my birthday because I played D&D all the time, and so I got it like at just the right age or maybe the wrong age, right, in high school, and it blew my mind. And so but I felt like I could never run it because it was so, you're dealing with infinity, right? You're dealing with all of these huge areas. And so you would get these little glimmers of like, well, here's a town and here's an important person and here's, another thing. But you're supposed to somehow get people to go through this like infinite, wasteland or infinite forest or whatever. And I could never figure out a way to make that work. And so that was kind of part of the impetus for behind Hot Springs Island, or well, the Swordfish Islands, when I started working on it with my buddies, is that I was like, so I want to make something that's sort of the opposite of that, and that's just incredibly, incredibly dense, and that it's a relatively small area. There's 25 hexes, but they're all 2-mile hexes. They're not the bigger 6-mile hexes. So that there's just like a lot of stuff that's in there that you just kind of run into and bump into. And so everything's kind of next to each other and just sort of automatically, I guess, like linked in some way by proximity, if nothing more. And then when we started it, one of the big things at the beginning of The Dark of Hot Springs Island, I kind of describe everything as being a sand.
Jacob,
Yeah.
move your mic just down a little bit because we're getting
sure.
the popping from your breathing.
Okay. Yeah. Nobody wants the popping.
Yep.
All right. So yeah, so I describe it as being a sandbox of black powder, like black powder explosives, because that's made of these basic components. You've got your charcoal, you've got your saltpeter, you've got your sulfur, and then once you add some fire, it's all going to explode in just a different way. So if you were able to, clone this same keg of black powder and set it on fire every time, you're going to get a different looking explosion each time, and that's kind of what we tried to go for with this, was something that could explode very easily, and however it exploded just sort of augmented the game, and how it was supposed to be, because there is no way that it's supposed to be, um because there's no future that's detailed in the book. It's just pieces of the past that are going to have consequences as soon as they're discovered or uncovered, or so it's dealing with all these ramifications.
Right, and then
um
you talk about the dark in there, and the
mhm.
that is basically the secret information for each one of the different locations is labeled as the dark, and that gives you a better understanding as you're reading through it of what kinds of things are going on.
Right, it's the actual sort of the truth of the matter of what things are. So I mean, that's got your nitty gritty details for the dungeon master to use. So you have your hex key, and it has each, like I said, each hex has 3 locations in it. So you turn to the page that has hex number 4, and it has your 3 locations right there. It has a brief bit of information that you could either read to the players, or you could just like BS off of, to tell them what they see. And then it has additional information that then the players can uncover. Like there's always something that you can find, there's always something that you can do. And I tried to set it up so that like pretty much everything you need to run hex number 4 is on one page in the book. So when you look at that page, you have your 3 locations. It's got the information about them, and then there's also up at the top of the page there's like a quick encounter table like reference that you have. And then additionally, like one of the things that I tend to, like, one of my weaknesses when I'm describing areas is, like all the jungle feels the same, right? And we have different terrain types. Like there's heavy jungle, and there's light jungle, and there's mountainous jungle. And so how do you make that feel different when you're at the table and describing stuff? And so we came up with a list of about 20 like sensory words and phrases of like smells and sounds and sights that are specific to like the light jungle and the dark, or the heavy jungle. Because the light jungle, there's sunbeams that are coming through. So like sunbeams is one of the words that's there that you can incorporate into your descriptions.
Mhm.
Whereas in the heavy jungle, it's going to be more humid and stinky and whatnot. And so those kind of words are there as well. So we try to make what you need kind of in your face, when you're on that page, so that you can just expand off of that. And then it goes after that for any sub-locations, right? So like your villages or your dungeons or things like that, those all have a full breakdown as well, and a map. And the way that those are set up is that everything you need to run that dungeon is going to be on that 2-page spread, because I hate flipping back and forth in books. So I want to have, if I'm looking at, room number 7 or room number 5, like I want that information to be like right there in front of me, so that I don't have to go back and forth, multiple times.
And that
And
is really something that a lot of publishers don't, or at least on their first couple of attempts, they don't keep in mind, is the importance sometimes of how close is the information, how easily found is the information. So that's a really nice layout achievement on that.
thanks. Yeah, and it was just tough because you can't fit a whole lot of information on 2 pages. Like
Yeah,
it's
no,
very
it's true.
I mean, there's only so much room. And so, sometimes
I didn't say it was easy.
exactly, but it's just, it's going through it and going over it and saying, okay, what's actually important to tell people about, this area right here. What's the critical piece of information, and trying to always bring that to the front and bring that to the front. And, sometimes the thing that we think is the critical piece of information really wasn't. And then we're playtesting, and all of a sudden we're like, oh God, we totally missed this. We need to, fix this. And so that was a good process. It took us a while to get everything done. I mean, it took us several years of working on this, but that actually worked out very well, because then we kept going back to it and saying like, no, we need to fix this, and no, we need to fix this. So it kind of became a grind, but at the same time, I think it was pretty worthwhile. Um, yeah.
Now, in addition to the having the density of information so
Mhm.
that it's all right where you need to see it, At the same time, at the very beginning of the book, what you've got is a breakdown of the various factions, and then for each one of them, you've got a list of here's where they are, here's where they are, here's where they are, and a like a one. I think it's like a one sentence description or very short description of what they're all about, so that when somebody first starts reading the book, or I guess also if you start having to page back to find out things, but when you're first starting to read the book, you get a fairly good idea very quickly on that. Okay, broad brushstrokes. You know, there's these guys, there's these guys, there's the ancients that are there, there's the and then you start moving toward the actual locations, and in between those two, I mean, the transition is here are the factions. Now we're going to go to encounter tables, you know, for the thing at large
Yeah.
on the map, and then we start breaking down into the individual locations. And so I thought it was very nicely done, the way that you developed it from the broad brush strokes to the to getting more and more specific, and then keeping the density of the text in there. I think it's one of the more usable sandbox adventures. Call it an adventure. I mean, it's a sandbox, so you can't even really call it an adventure. But it, you know, in terms of being able to very quickly find what you need, get what you need, you know, I think it was I was struck by how well it was organized.
Thank you. I think part of it is that, Evan Peterson, one of the other creators, and we were on the same team at, we were working together at a company, and one of our job duties was sending out these reports and, sending the reports to the executives. And so our boss would come in all the time and say, like, okay, so for that email that you're going to send out, you're going to attach the report to it, but you've got to be sure to put the red crayon version, because, the CEO is only going to be reading like the red crayon version, on the notepad. That's really all they care about. They want that high level, synopsis. And then if they want to dig down into the reports, then they will dig down into the reports. But ultimately, they should be able to get everything they need to kind of go off of, for their purposes from that just simple, like super simple email. And so I think that was more of an inspiration for us than we may have originally, initially realized that it was, because we would do that all the time. And so then coming, to the like a tabletop game, and for like a huge amount of information that it does get very complex. You've got to be able to have that sort of overview, or the big red crayon version, or the super easy to understand and process that,
Well,
ultimately.
sure, because the
Yeah,
reader's coming to it completely cold, right? At the
right,
very
right.
beginning. Really helpful, you know, as a reader to suddenly get, okay, here's the very top level description of what's going on. Now we can start, you know, reading, and you won't feel like, am I in the wrong place? You know,
Exactly. And
yeah.
hopefully, also it's very actionable stuff too, that theoretically, if you wanted to, you could, if you were an experienced game master, run a game, with just those bullet points from the overview. Like that's enough for you to expand off of. But then if you say like, hey, I'm really interested in these ogres and what these ogres are doing, and this specific character whose name keeps coming up over and over and again, excuse me,
Mhm.
let me find him further on, let me find the actual details when they're important to me. So since it's a sandbox as well, I think the really difficult thing about sandboxes is that in order for them to be successful, the players have to be engaged. Like the players are the ones that are driving the entire like play experience by their decisions of where they go and what they do. And so part of the thing is that as a DM in that perspective is you're almost like chasing after the players a lot of the time, and catching up with
Oh
them.
yeah,
And so yeah,
chasing after them and panicking about what they're doing.
exactly. And so since it's a limited island, and since it has, a footprint, right? Either you're on the island or you're off the island. Then when the players go in a direction, you can then turn to that page in the book when you need it. You don't have to read every dungeon in order to start running the sandbox. You can just turn to the Lapis Observatory when the players decide to go to the Lapis Observatory. Because, what could happen is they could go to the dungeon, they could see it sitting up on the mountain, they could say, there's probably treasure in there, but you know what? We don't want to do that today. And that's totally fine, because like you don't have to go in there. Nobody has to read it. Nobody has to know about it. If they want to go off someplace else and they want to have, a party with the salamanders, like that's totally doable. Then you just turn to a different page, right?
And I should jump in here and say too that part of the reason why organization is an issue here is that this is no small book. We're talking about 200 pages
Mhm.
of material in a fairly large I mean, it's still sort of have to call it a mini campaign given the fact that it's not large in space, and so they can get across it, fairly easily. So, so it's not like a full-blown campaign. So you can get an idea of the kind of the wealth of information that's in it, given the fact that it's that small an area, but is a 200-page resource, and it's one that's been laid out densely. So you'd sort of have to take a look at it. But in terms of the in terms of the value for the money, it's a very, very good deal. And in terms of, that also gives rise to the issues with the organization. So that's,
Well, I mean, one of the things that's just like been totally amazing to see is that there is a group of people that like I don't even know them. I've just interacted with them a little bit here and there online in Brooklyn, I believe it is, or the Bronx, somewhere like in New York, and they've been playing. They've been playing on Hot Springs Island 22 weeks out of the last 24 weeks. So they've gotten together and they've played their whole session on Hot Springs Island for like 22 weeks now, and it just keeps going. So I mean, yeah, there's a lot of content in here, and it's amazing to see like like I don't know who these people are, and they're playing this game and they're loving it, and they've gone for like 22 weeks. Like that's awesome.
yeah, no,
So
it's
yeah,
great when you hear stuff like that. It really is.
absolutely.
Now, but so now let's talk about your co-authors and the team that you had working on it, because it's not just you that's doing this. You
Right.
had a whole process going on that you've been working on, and since you mentioned already, learning how to write letters to CEOs, you were mentioning you've already got someone else who worked with you. So tell me a little bit about the team.
Sure. So the team, it was me and then Evan Peterson, Donnie Garcia, and then Gabriel Hernandez. And so me and Donnie and Evan were all working together at the same company, and we were playing games together and all that kind of stuff. And so 2011, you know, happened, and in 2011, that was when like you were seeing all these Kickstarters like start taking off, like, oh, hey, I'm going to do this Kickstarter for this awesome game, and it's going to be amazing, blah blah blah, and that people were throwing all this money at these creators, doing Kickstarters that was just kind of like a hope and a dream, and it was a little intoxicating to watch. And I was like, we can do that, guys. Like we have good stories, we have good content, we have good stuff. Like we can do what they're doing, but I want to make sure that we get it all finished first. Like we need to get it written, we need to get it laid out, we need to do all that stuff, and then we'll go to Kickstarter so that we can like do a print run, and make really pretty books. And so, Evan and Donnie were like, okay, well that sounds fun. I mean, we met at a pizza place and we talked about like, well, what could we do and how could we, you know, get this all together. And Evan and Donnie have been playing together for years, back into high school and everything. And they brought along a map, and on this map there was a little spot that said the Swordfish Islands. And I was like, that is the coolest name I have ever heard. Like, what is the Swordfish Islands? And they were like, well, we really don't know. It was just kind of over there on this map, and like there were elves there, but there's not elves there anymore, and that's pretty much all we know about it. And I was like, I think we should call it the Swordfish Islands. I think that'd be really good. And so it then just all kind of like built up from there. And then how Gabriel, got involved. Like I've been a huge fan of Gabriel's artwork for a long time. Like I love his stuff. I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and he's from Austin, and he would do art shows and stuff down in San Antonio. And so I was going to his shows quite a bit, and I think he makes the most amazing monsters. And so I hit him up one day and was like, Gabriel, like I'm working on this project with some friends. Would you maybe want to do some monsters, and we could do commission or, something like that. And so he came over to, a few of our sessions, and it was amazing. Cause basically what happened is that instead of getting together every week to play like Dungeons and Dragons or, what have you, we were getting together every week and we were world building. Like, what is the Swordfish Islands, and what are on these islands, and what kind of factions are there, and how do things interact and everything. And and so then Evan and Donnie and I would, we would be sitting around just like throwing stuff on the table, and killing bad ideas and killing good ideas and bringing good ideas back, and going back and forth. And then Gabriel would just be sitting there just kind of drawing, and then he'd be like, hey, check this out, guys, and he'd kind of throw it on the table, and we'd be like, that's amazing, oh my god, we have to change everything we're doing, and go with that. Like,
That is a neat process, because
it was
not,
amazing.
that is not a normal way of putting a book together, to have
Yeah.
the artist there at the same time and having the people there all at the same time in real time. I mean, Bill Webb and I have often said, we need to get in a room together at the same time and write to see where it gets us. You guys actually did that. That's cool.
It was magical. It's just that what happened is that we kept like we kept adding more and more and more and more because I would use a OneNote, Microsoft OneNote, because it was really good. You can put tabs in it. You can type whatever you want, wherever you want. You can throw pictures in. If somebody had heard a song that they liked, we could just like link it and put it like right there. So we could have all of our notes of like, okay, so here's Hot Springs Island, and these are the visual images that make us think of it, and like here's all the notes of everything that we've written down. And so then it finally came to this point where, I mean, we'd been doing this for like weeks because we were really like, well, I mean, months even, because we were world building instead of gaming. And so then one day I was like, okay, guys, we got to stop. Like, we need to just let's get one island finished. Because what we wanted to do is we wanted to do, again, to kind of go back to Planescape, right? They had a box, and inside the box were a few books, and that was your product. And I was like, well, that'd be perfect. Swordfish Islands, you have a box for Swordfish Islands, and inside of it you've got 9 books, one for each of the little islands. Just a quick overview thing, like, it's not a problem. And then
And now one of the islands is a 200-page book.
right, one of the islands is a 200-page book. Well, it's 2 books, right? There's a
I know.
200-page
I'm sorry. I keep.
big book, and right. See, I have these are my like demo copies. See, I have the big one. This is the dark, and then this is the field guide, which, I mean, I guess we could talk about a little bit. But with the dark, yeah, so I was like, yeah, we just need to finish one island. Which island should we do? And so we ultimately decided to do Hot Springs Island, and that's what we got done, and it turned out pretty good.
And so then what happened next? From the point that you guys you got it written, you had it illustrated, then Kickstarter.
Well, once we got everything into OneNote, because see, that was the thing, is that was just our notes, right? We had bullet points. There was slop all over the place. It was ugly. It was not. It was not pretty at all.
Mhm.
And so then what we kind of did is we wrote sort of in I don't know. Like, Evan took a first pass at the notes, and he wrote, things from those notes, and turned it into something that ideally you could use at the table.
Mhm.
And then Donnie came through and kind of went over what Evan did and sort of edited and added his own thing. And then it came to me, and I sort of had like the final, like cutting and editing and everything. And then we would get together again and discuss, like, okay, so here's the information about Svarku, the Ifrit that lives in the volcano. Like, is everybody good with this? Do you like this story? Is this good, or is this not? And so that worked out pretty good. That delayed and lengthened the process quite a bit, but I think it was worth it, and it worked for us. So that's what we did.
Well, clearly, I mean, when you're up for both best adventure and best product of the year, God, even just getting nominated says you did something right there.
Yeah. So yeah, so then we did that, and then I said, like, hey, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I can teach myself how to do layout. Like, it can't be that hard.
Oh my God,
And
famous
so-
last words.
yeah, yeah. And so then after I pulled myself out of a ditch several times, no, it was fun and exciting.
Did you do you did the layout?
I did the layout,
And
yeah. So
you taught yourself how to do it. It's nice. I mean,
I did the layout. I read a lot of stuff. I took, lynda.com, those InDesign videos are really pretty great. And so yeah, that was fun. And then of course everybody else was like, Jacob, what's taking so long? What, how's it going? And I was
do you
like,
have any idea what goes into layout? No, there's hilarious stories about me and Chuck Wright when I first started writing, and I had done like my own layout, and that's really, there's scare quotes around that because like in Microsoft Word, and working with a layout artist, the first time that I'd ever done it, there's just hilarious stories about Matt not understanding what the hell's going on in the layout process, but man, kudos to you for trying to learn InDesign.
well, and then the thing is that it probably kind of damaged me in some ways to work on other projects, right? Because so this was like our project and my project, and I'm doing the layout on it, and I'd kind of done the final editing pass of like our internal editing. And so when I'm trying to make a dungeon fit on 2 pages, well, I could just go into the layout directly and be like, well, this doesn't fit and I need to reword this and let's change this. And so I was doing all these things that you're not supposed to do.
Uh-huh.
And so then, you try and work on another project with other people and you're like, well, this doesn't fit on the page. So can't we just edit these 3 things? And then suddenly that turns into like, a 6 email back and forth. And yeah, so it's exciting. But it worked out and it was good. So that was, yeah. And so once the layout got done, um, we also got there were a number of other people that also contributed. Like there's a guy, Billy Longino, that did almost all the maps in the book because Gabriel didn't really do maps. His monsters are amazing, and so then Billy did the maps, and then we got some supplemental illustrations. There's a guy, Jason Thompson, who does really awesome maps. He made this huge map of like the ruined elven city that's on here. And then Juan Ochoa did some non-player character portraits, and Eric Quigley did some really amazing item like treasure magic items drawings. And then there's a couple things from Cecil Howe in here too, just for the for like the hex map quick overview. So like we got a lot of people. There was a lot of I don't know, like a really good thing from this person and a really good thing from that person and a really good thing from that person. And then we just mixed it all together and put it into one book and said, here,
Yep.
eat this,
And
right? Or use this, right? It's like cooking, right?
and what you came out with in this book is, I think it's 270 different locations that are in there, 87 NPCs that you've got in there. It's like 300 treasures that are listed. I'm relying on your numbers from the beginning, but I mean, it's
I know,
clearly
I don't remember. And it's one of those things where it's like I used to have those numbers memorized, and then they've all just kind of
well, you wrote it
evaporated.
in the
But like,
introduction because believe
right.
me, I did not go through and count every every treasure, every location. I got that from you, but it's I want to try and give people an idea of the scope of it because I think it's an unusual ratio of square mileage to words in terms of
Yeah.
the area that you've got covered and the amount of detail that you've got in that area, because this is the kind of thing, this kind of density of detail normally you see in about a 16-page 32-page thing where it's very condensed, whereas what you've got is a 200-page book that is done at the text density and the information density where a lot of other books at the 200-page mark have got wider margins. They've got much more stuff that's fluff. They haven't cut out as much of the fat, and so it was interesting to see it done because this is really like a very compact, almost like a module that's been that is at the same density. I'm not even sure I'm making sense here, but I think probably people listening know what I'm saying. So that's
Well, I think one of the things that that I was saying from the beginning to the guys was, so for all of the locations that are on the island that are in the hexes, they're all physical locations. They're things that probably don't change. They can change, but it's going to be something like a spring, like of water coming out of the ground, or there's going to be like a volcanic, excuse me, vent or some geysers or something that's going to be there for a long time. Whereas in a number of other like hex crawls and stuff, what'll happen is that you'll have like a 6 mile hex, and inside of that 6 mile hex you'll have one thing, and the one thing that's talked about is like there's a gnome sitting by the side of the road on a stump and he's playing a flute, and you walk up and he asks you a riddle, and then that's it. And so you have 6 miles of wilderness, and the only thing that's detailed is like a singular event. So once players are going and they go through that hex and they consume that content, there's kind of nothing else there. And so one of the things that we tried to keep in mind while we were doing this, because we all grew up on video games and love video games, and like, so I would say like try and think about Street Fighter 2, right? In all of Street Fighter 2, there are these really cool background levels. You've got like the bathhouse from Street Fighter 2, you've got the docks, you've got the airfield, and so it's this cool place that's a background that would be a really cool place to have a fight, or a really cool place to have a party or some sort of like non-player character interaction. And so we tried to do that with all of the locations that are in there, is make them just like nice backdrops that you could keep coming back to. So you could go through there one time and maybe you run into some fire guy that needs some help, and so you help him out, and then you can come back later and discover something new or do something different. Or you can learn from that location and say like, hey, this would be a really good place for us to have an ambush. And so then, 2 sessions later, you could trick, people that you're fighting to go through that area and then ambush them. So I guess the players could kind of gain knowledge of the world because it was, in some cases, it's sort of static, right? Like the world itself is static. And then it's just the non-player characters that are kind of, transitional or.
Right. And then
Yeah.
now you said you had the story of the printing of it.
Oh, the print. Well, the printing was fun. I tried to go with a number of printers. I wanted to have it printed. So I'm from Texas. I'm in Texas. There's a book binder here in San Antonio, and I was like, I want to have it done, locally, and that proved to be very difficult and very expensive, and it didn't work out. Um, and then I had found a company up in Michigan because there's a bunch of like book manufacturers in Michigan and in the upper United States, and
Uh,
so I started hitting them up. And so what ultimately kind of killed things was this book right here, this cover. I don't know if you can see in the picture, but you see you have this big skull, and then there's this sort of overlapping black material, right, that covers it up. And so I had a number of printers that said, well, we can't do that book cover like you want to do it. And then I had the printer that I thought I was going to go with. They were like, we can do that, it's not going to be a problem, we can make this happen, everything is going to be awesome, yada yada yada. And basically in the 11th hour I discovered that it wasn't going to work because so when you look at the construction of this book, the black part is on top of like this brown part that has the skull. And so they were going to do it the opposite way, where the brown cloth with the skull print on it was going to be on top of the black part,
right.
which is theoretically fine. It's just that when the book goes through the manufacturing process and these things are going down a conveyor belt, there's the possibility that things are going to wiggle a little bit by like as much as a 16th of an inch. So then that would mean that there would have been a gap on some of the book covers between the skull and the black binding. And I was like, we can't have that. That's not acceptable. And so that was really exciting to navigate there because at that point, we'd already the Kickstarter was running. We told everybody we were going to use this printer, and then it just all rapidly fell apart. But what was cool was I then hit up Frisians, which is a printer up in Canada. They were the guys that did Maze of the Blue Medusa
Uh,
and printed like that physical book, which is gorgeous. And so I hit them up and I talked to them about it, and they were like, "Oh yeah, no, we could totally do that. Yeah, putting the black part on top of the brown part, that's not a problem. We can make all of that happen for you. Like, don't you worry." And so they did it, and they did like a fantastic job. And I really wanted to do the offset print run because ultimately what was important to me was having the binding of the book sewn, because when the binding is sewn, then the book opens up and lays basically flat on the table. It's not completely flat, but it's very, very flat. So when you're looking at a page spread at the table, it's just flat and open and in front of you so that you can read it. Because
you are going to
if
have a great friend in Bill Webb of Frog God Games because he has exactly the same
it's
thing about binding. In fact, he will take a book when it comes from the printer and he turns it upside down.
right. See,
Uh,
like I can do
like,
this with my
like,
book. Yeah.
wait, hold on, do it. Yeah. Well, what
Yeah.
he does is this: he takes the book and he shakes it
Oh, nice.
like that. And of course, that may not look so impressive when you're doing it with an old player's handbook, but he was doing it with 500-page books,
Right.
which is what Frog God was doing at the time. And he likes durable sewn books, and so I totally get how important that is, and for a lot of people who are out there too, it's vitally important to have a nice feeling book. It's a physical, tangible thing as well as just the contents of it, and there's a real joy in having a nicely done book too.
Yeah, absolutely. I had found like several years before, starting working on Swordfish Islands, I had gone out and was like in an antique store, and they had like a big box of all of these like prints that had been ripped out of old books from like the 1800s. And so you could get these prints and stuff. And I was like, these are so nice. And I mean, they've been around for a really long time. I was like, if I ever make a book, I want it to be like that, where somebody could maybe rip it out, and have it 100 years from now or something. So yeah, I don't know if that's
Yeah.
necessarily the best thing, but like that's what I decided I wanted, so that's what I did.
Yeah, no, I mean that's one of the things about small press is that you get something so much more interesting when people do what they want rather than, at the large publisher level of what we think we should do.
Sure.
And so, and I'm working on a big push, which, and we've talked about it. So it's not like this is a surprise to you. I'm really more talking to the audience, but I'm working on a big push to help out several of the small independent publishers who are up for Ennies, particularly the ones that follow the sort of old school approach of the freeform gaming, the sandbox, for example, and so just trying to get a little bit of support behind that, because there are also some very big companies that are up for Ennies.
Yeah.
Yeah, up against you,
Exactly.
no less.
I know.
So,
It's like, wow, we're up against Paizo. I guess that means we did a good job. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. You can imagine my frustration when I
Right.
when I got my Ennie award. I was like, oh wow, I'm up for an Ennie. Who else is up for an Ennie? And this is after the first season of Game of Thrones, and I'm up against Song of Fire and Ice.
Hey,
It's like, all right, great. Do they have a second place?
excellent. Yeah. Nice. Well, I mean, and
Anyway,
part of it too, it's like Lamentations of the Flame Princess was just, and Jim Raggi is just hugely inspirational. Like, and I think the things that he makes are just amazing. And that was the thing I would go tell the guys. I was like, we have to make books that are like this, because these books are beautiful and amazing, and they prove that it can be done, right?
yeah,
Because he's like basically a one-man show that's doing this stuff on this level. Well, we better be able to do that too, because that's who we want to be like. We don't necessarily want to be, like Wizards of the Coast or Paizo with, I mean, sure, they're doing these full color, glossy, beautiful things, but then pages were falling out of the 5th edition books, in the first run because the glue didn't get set right. And I'm like, we
yeah.
don't want to do that. Like, we want to do, Lamentation style. So that's what we were aiming. That's the bar, I think, and so trying
Wow,
to jump as high as we can.
that is the highest possible bar to set, because that's the absolute premium printing stuff.
Well,
So
we kept saying when we were working on it, the four of us, we'd be sitting in a room and we'd be talking about ideas and we'd be talking about things, and we were like, well, I don't know, I mean, should we do this or should we not? And then it was like our mantra. Somebody would say, go big or go to hell, go big or go to hell, go big or go to hell. All right. All right. So we would just push and push and push. And so yeah, it
awesome.
was awesome.
All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap it up, and we'll still be connected on the thing after I take us off of the air. But so say goodbye to all of the fans,
All right, bye everybody. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
and I'll say to everybody, no matter what kind of Dungeons and Dragons it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.